Ambassador Zethkar adjusted his ceremonial robes as he entered the lecture hall of the Galactic Military Academy. The young cadets from 17 different species sat in perfect formation, their eyes, or optical sensors, focused intently on the decorated veteran. Today's lesson would be one they would never forget. "Cadets," Zethkar began, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of experience. "You've studied the territorial maps, analyzed fleet compositions, and memorized battle tactics of every major civilization in the galaxy. But there's one species we've never engaged in warfare, despite their relatively recent arrival to the galactic stage." A young Vorthan cadet raised her tentacle. "The humans, sir?" "Precisely." Zethkar's mandibles clipped approvingly. "And today, I'll tell you why." The ambassador activated the holographic display, showing a blue-green world spinning slowly in the center of the room. Earth. A death world by any reasonable standard. Gravity that would crush most of our bones. An atmosphere that's practically poison to half the species represented here. And weather patterns that range from scorching deserts to frozen wastelands. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The humans evolved here. They didn't just survive, they thrived. They conquered every environment their world could throw at them. Mountains, oceans, polar ice caps, dense jungles. They made them all home. The display shifted to show various human activities: mountaineering, deep-sea exploration, polar expeditions. But that's not why we don't fight them. Physical hardiness can be overcome with superior technology. No, the reason runs much deeper. A crystalline cadet's form shimmered as it spoke. Their military capabilities are inferior to most galactic powers. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Zethkar's expression grew serious. That's exactly the kind of thinking that cost the hegemony 3 entire fleets. The room fell silent. Every cadet knew about the hegemony, the galaxy's most advanced military power, whose technological superiority was legendary. 40 years ago, Zethkar continued, the hegemony decided to test human resolve. They blockaded Earth's solar system, cutting off all trade and communication. They expected quick surrender from a species barely capable of interstellar travel. The holographic display showed sleek hegemony vessels surrounding Earth's system like a steel noose. The humans sent a single transmission. "We understand. You want to see what we're made of. We accept." Zethkar's voice grew quieter, more reverent. Within 6 months, the humans had converted their entire civilian infrastructure into a war machine. Asteroid mining operations became weapons foundries. Cargo haulers became troop transports. Agricultural stations became military bases. The display showed the transformation. Civilian ships bristling with improvised weapons. Space stations converted into fortresses. Mining equipment repurposed as military hardware. But here's what truly terrified the hegemony intelligence analysts, Zethkar continued. The humans didn't just prepare for war, they prepared for a war of extinction. Every human colony, every settlement, every ship became a potential weapon. They rigged their own infrastructure to deny it to the enemy. They turned their cities into fortresses and their children into soldiers. A young Zentari cadet's scales rippled with unease. Surely they couldn't have been effective against hegemony technology.
They weren't, Zethkar admitted. In direct confrontation, they lost every engagement. But they kept fighting. When their ships were destroyed, they used the wreckage as weapons. When their stations fell, they turned them into traps. When their planets were invaded, every human became a guerrilla fighter. The holographic display showed the grim progression: burning cities, desperate last stands, humans fighting with primitive weapons against advanced technology. The hegemony realized something that chilled them to their core, Zethkar said, his voice barely above a whisper. The humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to make the cost of victory unbearable. They were willing to sacrifice everything, their worlds, their civilizations, their very species, to ensure that anyone who attacked them would remember the price forever. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle on the young cadets. The hegemony withdrew after 8 months. They had won every battle, but they knew they couldn't win the war. Not against a species that would literally burn their own worlds rather than surrender them intact. Zethkar deactivated the display and looked at each cadet in turn. That's why we never fight the humans. Not because we can't defeat them, but because defeating them would cost us everything we value. They've turned their entire existence into a weapon pointed at anyone foolish enough to threaten them. The lecture hall remained silent for a long moment before Zethkar spoke again. Remember this lesson, cadets. In war, sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when never to fight.